All right. Let's get started here. So as with the other weeks, we're gonna have the same exact format where I'll go over all the materials first, and then we'll have some time at the end for you to ask questions on the material, anything Munich related, whether that be traditional committees, non-traditional committees, logistical matters. But I'm really excited to have you guys here. Once again, this is the traditional training, and this will be recorded and put on YouTube if you need a refresher as you continue to prepare for me. Oh, and also, throughout the session, if like any question sort of pops up, I'm not really able to see my screen. So just feel free to put that in the Q&A and then I'll get to it sort of at the end. So this week's MUNUC Academy session is on mergers and negotiations, like a super important skill for traditional Model UN, but also super important for non-traditional Model UN. I know most of you have not, well, all of you have not gotten your committee assignments yet, so not sure if you're participating on traditional or non-traditional, but super helpful regardless, and then obviously in your life as well. As a brief introduction, my name is Christina Gao. I'm the Secretary General of MUNIC 37. That means I don't really run a committee, but I kind of just oversee the logistics of MUNIC as an overall. I'm a senior at U Chicago. I'm majoring in economics and public policy. Always happy to sort of answer any questions on that as well if any of that pops up. Prior to this, I was the USG of continuous crisis committees. But I have chaired a traditional committee before, I promise, at Munich, China, and I chaired the IAEA alongside Lucas Freitag. Um, so just a little over what we're going to go over today is mergers, negotiating, and Model UN, and obviously that time for you guys to go ahead and ask questions if you have any. Um, so let's just dive right into it. I think that like as we go through this lesson in this presentation, negotiations are kind of built straight into that merger step, right? And a lot of it is how you approach it, it's how you sort of handle yourself and how you communicate with others. So a lot of it's going to be on the merging process itself, but I want you to take the bigger picture image and kind of understand that mergers, um, by the like definition of the fact that you are taking two pieces of information or documents that are completely different from each other and putting them together, that is a negotiation in and of itself. And so just sort of keep that in mind as we go through. So merging effectively, the golden rule is to be kind, respectful, and collaborative. Um, I want you guys to also to think about a time where you were working with someone in a group presentation or like a group project. I can probably bet that it was probably a lot easier to work with them if they were kind, respectful of your ideas, and listened to you, and they were also willing to collaborate with you versus not willing to collaborate with you or completely shutting you out. And what merging really is where you combine two or more working papers into one draft resolution, right? You're probably going to merge between Saturday 1 and 2. And this is your opportunity to demonstrate to the dais your leadership, your diplomacy, and your knowledge of your content, right? But maybe most importantly at Munich, you are showing us that you know how to work with people and you know how to give that space to people when they have other ideas that might be different from your own. And I would argue that might be the most important skill that you can pull away from merging and negotiating. So merging effectively, I'm going to break these down to before, during, and then we're going to do a step-by-step guide as to how you can merge effectively and kind of still hold your ground while being that like kind, respectful, collaborative person, right? So before the merger, you want to make sure that you are paying attention. You are looking for people that you could potentially merge with, whether that be an opening speech where they talk about a policy that is, interesting and relevant to them, that aligns with the policy that you want to pursue. Do they have a similar solution to you? Do they have a completely opposite solution to you? The time before the merger is the time for you to sort of like vet out and kind of understand where a block is at or where a certain person is at and whether or not you can work with that person. By this time in committee, you've already created your block, right? Like you already know the people that you're working with. You probably have some sort of working paper already written up and ready to go. Um, and I think it's incredibly important not only for you to lead your block and demonstrate leadership, but also go out there and ask your block, what is it that we're hoping to get out of the merger, right? Like, what is the most important thing to us in this merger? And how do we continue to sort of um, achieve that and uphold that? And then obviously make sure that you're reading your own working paper, make sure that you're reading other people's working papers. I would say before the merger, the most important thing to do is stay active and stay informed. That just simply means like no, like kind of trailing off or being like, okay, like we read our working paper, we're just going to pursue this as a draft resolution. You are absolutely going to be asked to merge, and the dais probably will frown upon the fact that you don't merge if you don't. Um, And then going to the next slide, during the merger, this is mostly discussion based. It's like an open conversation that you're going to have with your block members, you're going to have with the leaders of the other blocks. You might be merging with one block, you might be merging with two, and you might be merging with more than that, depending on how your committee plays out. Um, so how do you want your draft resolution to look, right? Like, how do you structure it so it makes the most sense? Because at the end of the day, like, if it is poorly organized, it's a poorly organized draft resolution. But if you sit down and you sort of talk about how you want to approach it and how you want to, present your draft resolution at the end of the day, I think it also helps you in the voting process as well, right? Because the more intuitive sense or the more clear or concise information is presented to you, the more like it becomes clear that this is actually a solution to the problem. So make sure you're sitting through that, you're sitting down and having this conversation during the merger. Also, focus on merging similar clauses and content together, right? Like, you don't want to have two things that are on the opposite sides of the spectrum, and you're like, I'm going to force these two things together. What that usually is going to look like is a run on sentence that doesn't have anything to do with each other. However, if you have clauses that are similar to each other, you're able to put them together pretty neatly. And you're able to sort of like have this concise messaging that you want. Also, this is super big in Munich, and this is something that is brought up to the dais all the time. Do not cut content if it is not necessary. Um, Even if you are the only person in this block that thinks that this sentence is, not necessarily a sentence that we want in our final draft resolution, or the sentence is repetitive, or the sentence isn't helpful at conveying what I want it to convey, is it really taking up that space that you think it's taking up? Make sure you're having conversation with your double delegate, people in your original block, and people in your new block. And also, the most important thing is please do not cut someone's content without letting them know and without asking for their permission beforehand, right? And this is where that like being kind, respectful, and diplomatic sort of matter comes in. It is not kind to cut someone's content or something that they're proud of without asking them to. And you're also not just like shutting down, their content, but it's also an idea that they had. And us, I feel like when I hear these complaints, it is more like people are hurt of the fact that like their idea was shut down without their permission. So I'm not saying like do not cut content at all. What I am saying is like please make sure that you're having a conversation with someone before you decide to cut their content. And then also some questions that I want you to keep in mind while you are merging is what are your most important clauses, right? And this could look like sort of that like green, red, yellow technique that you'll probably hear more about as we get into clause writing. But basically, green are just things that like really represent like the ideas of the policy or the solution that you're trying to pursue. Yellow are just kind of maybes, and reds are just, fluff that you might have added in there to reach a certain length or to make something sound more dramatic or something even more creative, which are still great sentences. But what are the clauses that you absolutely have to keep for that resolution to still reflect the ideas that you want it to reflect? What is your brand? I think we've talked about branding previously in MUNUC Academy, but like, how does the dais remember you as a delegate? What is your solution, and how is it more unique than the other solutions that other delegates have proposed? And how do you maintain that brand while you are merging your clauses together? Obviously, when you write your draft resolution, you want the delegates to sort of be looking at it and be like, okay, like so and so delegate, really worked on this, or so and so delegate. Like I remember this in their speeches, and this made it to the draft resolution, or even in the working paper. So make sure that you're standing up for yourself and your brand. Where are the inconsistencies? Are there parts of your draft resolution or working paper that are contradicting each other? Those are the first things that people are going to ask you about in Q&A or during your presentation. So make sure that like you are actually scanning the entire draft resolution and working paper and making sure that you know all of the content in it. Where are the repetitions? Are there places you can cut things out? Are there things where you're just stating the same policy, the same core idea in many, many different ways? Is there a way you can cut that out? Those are going to be our red clauses, right? Whether that be, a really fluffy sentence where it's just like lots of extra descriptions that you don't necessarily need, or something where like you stated in the first clause, like, I want to protect the environment. And, the third clause is like the environment is super important. Clearly we know that the environment is super important. So figure out which one you want to keep and cut the other. And then most importantly, and what MUNUC looks at the most is, are you being kind? Are you shutting people out of your block because they don't agree with you? Or are you working beyond that and looking to sort of grow and like be open-minded? Are you being collaborative? Are you opening up a space for people to talk about their ideas, even if they don't necessarily reflect yours? And are you listening to others? is there feedback that you're getting from another delegate in your block that they feel maybe left out or they feel like their ideas were cut out? Are you listening to them? Are you taking their feedback? I think sometimes it can get super caught up in Model UN and a lot of other like academic activities where sometimes it feels really individualistic, right? But it's like you need these other countries, you need these other delegates to really work with you and feel respected by you in order for them to recognize you as a good leader. And I think that kind of is what that boils down to, just make sure that you are respectful, but you're also like putting your foot down and making sure that your ideas are being heard as well. We'll walk through this example really quickly. So how would you merge these? So the first working paper is Save the Whales, which one set up a new branch under the EPA that specializes in marine biology protection. Task the organization to also oversee ocean waste management and then protect marine animals from human threats such as overfishing and oil spills. And working paper No More Waste. Establish an internationally funded waste management organization that opens all coastal states, but are open for membership to all states that aim to develop A, new solutions to processing waste, and B, developing new energy related uses of waste. Right here, clearly this is not like an international organization that is talked about when we talk about the EPA, right? The Environmental Protection Agency is a US agency. And I think that is right there when you see that like one with that like main cause, sort of where you can sort of merge and you can have a conversation with the people who are leading the block Save the Whales about how, Model UN and especially the committees that you're in, especially if you're doing any type of waste management or environmental like safety agencies, those can be international agencies, right? So right off that bat, we can move that first main cause over. Um, and like international funded waste management organization, that is going to sort of also include the United States as well, but like also all states as a center. So we can have that sort of like main clause over there. And then when we look at our sub clauses, task the organization to also oversee ocean waste management, right? That kind of fits into develop new solutions to processing waste, but we can merge this clause here, right? Task the organization to both oversee waste management, both, on land and in water, and develop new solutions to processing waste, or simply like task the organization to oversee processes of like waste management. And then B, protect marine animals from human threats and overfishing, such as overfishing and oil spills, and then developing new energy related uses of waste. Those are two completely separate like subclauses that are not going to merge, right? Protecting marine animals is like one whole other thing, and developing new energy related uses of waste is a whole other thing. And then it's sort of up to you to determine the priority of these. Do you want to prioritize protecting marine animals from human threats such as overfishing and oil spills? When we look at that first main clause, it talks about coastal states, right? So I feel like that is something that would be important to a lot of these coastal states. And then we can have, subclause like the developing new energy related uses of waste. And it truly is as simple as that, sort of looking around, saying like, what is going to encompass as many states as possible, or what is the policy that is going to impact as many states and nations as possible? And then how similar are these clauses and how can we merge them together and bring them together? That is an example. I want you guys to sort of think about like how you would merge these. Please feel free to take a screenshot or like if you look at this on YouTube later, just sort of think about um, how you would merge these two working papers together to have, one main clause about like waste processes and organizations. And then obviously from here, we could have, other clauses about funding the waste management organization or emissions to this organization. But there's lots of ways to go from here. And I think that like both of these probably would continue talking about it if it was a fully fleshed out working paper. Um, but we just had a couple sample clauses here for you guys. So take some time, think about it. Yeah. And then let's move on to a step-by-step breakdown of merging. If you have any questions, I can't see them, but if you do, please feel free to leave them in the Q&A, and then we'll get to them in a bit. But a step-by-step breakdown of like actually how to merge, because it's like I could sit up here and tell you guys like, here are the foundational manners of merging, where like this is like the things to keep in mind of merging, but it's like how do you actually do it, right? Like when you are in conference and you have your working paper, how do you go out and merge with another block so that you have one cohesive draft resolution? And the first thing you want to do is identify groups that you want to merge with. So thinking back to that like pre-merger slide that we had earlier, committee will often have many different blocks by Saturday, right? Especially if you're in a really large committee like dissect and there's 400 of you and 200 pairs of double dells, Oftentimes these blocks are going to have many different ideas. Sometimes you'll have one mega block and then a bunch of smaller ones. Sometimes you'll have a bunch of small blocks. And then very rarely will you have only the number of blocks that the chair um, decides, accept in terms of draft resolution. So like example, if you have like 6 blocks, right? And the chair is like, okay, I'm only taking 2 draft resolutions. How do you whittle down the 6 into 2? Especially because the chair is telling you they're only taking 2. So your content has to get in there somehow, right? And that's why it's incredibly important to listen to people's opening speeches and listening to like what they propose the solutions to be, and also read their working papers, right? So throughout Thursday, Friday, and early Saturday, make sure you're identifying and listening to people that you feel like you are compatible with. I feel like most of the early ones that you listen to the Thursday and Friday are probably going to be people in their block. But make sure you're still listening throughout early Saturday and just like making sure that you understand like where people are in certain positions and how they can align with your position on the topic at hand. Step 2 is reach out to the leader. We'll talk about leadership a little bit more in future MUNUC Academy sessions, but you want to make sure that you are, an established leader of the block, whether you know all the content, you're listening to other people. People naturally gravitate to someone who is going to listen to them and someone who's willing to work in their content and their ideas. And that's why we keep stressing to be extremely kind and collaborative. But propose a conversation with the leader of the other block that you want to merge with. And this looks like sending them a note and being like, can we have a conversation during the next unmod? Or like, I know people work through lunch, or it's like, do you want to get lunch and talk about, where committees at or where your head's at? You can also propose a merger in a speech. But I think the things that you want to think about is like, what is it about your content, sorry, about their content that you think would benefit from a merge with their block, right? Because like, obviously you're convincing them that like your blocks are compatible enough that you can put them together and that their content is still going to be heard. And then once again, that time and collaboration during this conversation, like make sure that like you are like being like, I'm not going to cut your content. Like our interests are to hear what your causes are, figure out ways that we can put them together to have a cohesive draft resolution. I really want to emphasize that there is a fine line between, kind and open to collaborating, but also compromising your own brand and what your block stands for, right? Make sure that you're not doing that. Make sure you're standing up for your own block and the ideas that you have championed throughout conference. Make sure that your voice is still heard in these blocks, right? And like, I think the easiest way to do that is just be open to listening to people and like being super respectful. Step 3 is to hold on to your content. We just talked about this, but like, are there specific clauses that make your block unique? Make sure you're identifying these clauses that people can identify your initial block with. Wow, what a mouthful. And hold on to these clauses. We sometimes call these clauses like golden clauses or sort of clauses that like, are really important to the backbone of what your policy recommendation is or what your solution is to the topic at hand. Make sure that these clauses are making their way into that draft resolution. And it's absolutely okay to not like all of the content from the other block, right? You do not need to go and like have every single clause from every other person in your draft resolution because that's not merging anymore. That's literally just like putting all of the pieces together, which is like much easier to do than negotiating and reaching a compromise on what's there. Um, you and your block have an idea of what can and cannot work for the solution to the topic based off of what you guys have already talked about, based off of your working paper and what you guys have all advocated for. Make sure you're communicating this to like the leader of the other block in a communication block, right? You want to set expectations early. And you also want to just like, make sure that you guys are compatible in terms of ideas and stuff, because sometimes we could be wrong on like our first listen to someone speak. Um, Step 4 is going to be divide and conquer. You're going to split the newly merged, not clause, the newly merged sort of like draft resolution sort of into different groups so you have a cohesive draft resolution at the end, right? So who worked on what section in your unmerged group, right? Like in Save the Whales, does someone work on the financing? Does someone work on, government protections? Does someone work on developing a new agency? Those are 3 different groups, right? And then in the other one, like no more waste, someone is obviously also working on creating a new organization. Someone's working on waste management processes. Make sure you're grouping people together that work on those sections and then sort of thinking like, is there a way to merge these groups within these groups, right? Because you don't want people to feel left out. You want people to feel like they have an active part in this draft resolution. Focus on what you know. I hope that if you're leading your block, you have done the work for your block as well. So put yourself in a group with the topics that you are most comfortable on or the causes that you stand by the most. But make sure that you're also checking in with the subgroups around you, right? Make sure that you are identifying yourself as a leader, as someone who's willing to listen to them, as someone who's willing to put their content in the paper. Check in with your double delegate if you have one. I think sometimes there might be an uneven balance of sort of like work in a pair of double delegates. So just make sure that your double delegates doing okay, that they're happy with the actions that you guys are doing, because ultimately it's a reflection on the two of you. And then the reason why I say it's so important to focus on all the other stuff beyond just your own is that it is so important to know all of the content in the merge document. Um, if you decide to go up for Q&A, if you decide, that you are going to defend this document and you're going to go up there and convince people to vote for your draft resolution and pass it, you need to know what is going on in all of the sections of this working paper and not just your own. And this could just sort of, be sitting down with the other boss or like once you finish writing what you need to write, going over and being like, okay, like what did we do here? Make sure that you know the content. And I think it is also much easier to convince someone to give you a Q&A slot if you're able to defend the content because you know it well. And then five, hold your ground, but also make sure that you collaborate. At this point, there might be disagreements on what to keep and what not to keep. Um, and I think it's because different people are going to have different perceptions of what is a green clause, what is a yellow clause, what is a red clause, what is your golden clause. And I think it's pretty natural. It's a part of Model UN. You're going to discuss what works and what doesn't work. But make sure, and you're following these two things, never delete someone's content without their permission. This is highly frowned upon in MUNUC and should be frowned upon in other conferences as well. You want people to feel like their voices are heard. And you don't want people to feel like you made this decision and they didn't have a say in it. They've also put their work in as well, and it is unfair to them if you just delete their content. Push for your clauses. You really want to make sure that they stay in the merge document. You don't want your clauses to be at the very bottom, or you don't want these clauses to be, completely out of order, maybe not in a place that you want it to be. And you don't want the wording in these clauses to be different, especially if they are your golden clauses that you think represent your brand and who you are and what your block stood for. Make sure that they are in this document, right? And obviously, there is a very kind, respectful, and collaborative way to do it. And I know I sound like, a broken clock by this point, but like the most important thing and like the best leaders that I have seen in GA committees are people who are kind, respectful, and collaborative. That means like even if you know someone doesn't necessarily agree with your block, you're going up to them and you're asking, what are your thoughts? Um, it also means just going up to people who like may have similar ideas to you, but maybe don't feel like they want to merge. Like actively seeking people to add to your blog, even if that means talking to individual people within another block as well. If you are showing people that you're willing to listen to their ideas and find space for their ideas, people are going to naturally gravitate towards you as a leader. And I can't stress this enough. And I think the two biggest rules here are to be that kind, respectful, and collaborative leader, but also to never delete someone's content because it's kind of hard to go back and be like, oh, like I'm listening to you, but they're like reviewed as that like you deleted their content without asking. And these are the basic 5 steps of how to merge and negotiate your way into having a draft resolution that you hopefully feel like represents your brand, your block, and what you have been working for during conference. Um, and there are other nuances that we'll continue talking about, but let's go to next step. So MUNUC Academy is done for this calendar year. We'll resume again in January, so week 7 or 6. For the traditional track, will be clauses, working papers, and merging. Here we're going to get into the nitty gritty on how to write your clauses. So what is your working paper supposed to look like? And we're really, really, really getting to that like merging process because this is more of a preliminary idea on like how to merge. And then week 7 on the non-traditional track, I think it's a little bit harder to understand what a merger and what a block looks like in non-traditional model UN. And that kind of just looks like, you know, directives and like a chair setting a directive path. Your block is just the people that you work on your directive with, but these are applicable in both. And then refer to the email for all future training sessions. At this time, I'm happy to take any questions, whether that be on content or on MUNUC as a whole. But Also, like, if there are no questions, like, you're always free to email me at like section@munic.org. Always happy to answer them there. Um, but if no questions, I'm also happy to just like end this call here. And you can feel free to reach out to your USGs or your committee diocese once you receive your committee assignment. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to give you guys 30 minutes back onto your day. Once again, just feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and thanks so much for showing up.